What's up, people? Good evening, gang. James says,
How are you, peeps and geeks? Yeah, that's hard for you to say evening, isn't it? Because it's not your evening, James.
It's not my evening. That's why I was all like, I'm looking outside. I'm like, it's morning. It's morning here. It's morning.
Welcome, everyone, to the other side of cyber. You are here with Mr. James J. Azar, the other side of the world, and myself, Ms. JJ, Ms. Jacqueline Jane, on the other side, down under in Australia. And we are here to serve you and to help you understand the other side of cyber. What are we doing today, James? And what do we need to tell our friends, our followers, our listeners?
So here's one thing. We are live on Facebook, LinkedIn, and YouTube on the Cyber Hub podcast page. But for those that want just the other side of cyber, you can go to our YouTube page where in May we'll start streaming directly from there. I hope. So go subscribe there now. Other side
Why
of
are
cyber.
we talking like
Down.
this?
All right.
Down.
I like using my fingers to do all kinds of stuff because then it gets people like hypnotized.
Because everybody, we need to understand, for those listening to the podcast right now, James has a new stand-up desk. So it's like he's moving around. I'm actually on a fit ball, so I could start bouncing and James is moving and we could hypnotize you into the world of cyber so that you all know what's going on. And remember, folks, what we do is we spend 30 minutes talking about a topic, which is a really interesting one today. We're talking about cyber warfare. And what does that actually mean to you, to me, to James, to companies, to countries, and to the world in general? It's an interesting topic, and we're not sure how it's going to end up because we never do. We have a good idea about what we're going to talk about. Your questions will help us. So after that 30 minutes, when we say goodbye to our podcast people, we'll be continuing the conversation. And good news, we will also be doing some double streaming or synchronized concurrent streaming. There's a new term over with our friends at Clubhouse. If you aren't on Clubhouse, please let us know. We'll be able to send you invites from our club, The Other Side of Cyber, which we do have on Clubhouse as well. So James, tell us, what is cyber warfare?
So very interesting that you picked this topic, JJ. I mean,
it's in the news. Come on.
It is in the news, but it's also it's a very interesting topic for a bunch of reasons. So cyber warfare for people in, let's argue, the news, the media industry,
yep,
they think it's going to garner clicks for them. The average human the average human being who's uninformed goes, oh my God, World War III is going to be cyber. This hacker is going to hack this hacker, and this hacker is going to hack this and that and that. And so let's kind of bring it all down together, and then bring it into a environment where we can explain it in a non-complex manner.
Yep.
Okay. So here's two things about it. One, cyber warfare, like kinetic warfare, like asymmetrical warfare, like traditional maritime or air warfare, is cyber is just another realm. It's the fifth dimension. Okay. How realistic is it that the next war will be a cyber warfare? Very.
Well, it's sort of already happened. You know, as they would say, shots have been fired, James. It's like if, how do wars start traditionally? It's someone does something and, there's that old saying that most wars are started by two men loving the same woman and they fight. But this is a little bit different. We've come a fair way from there, I would hope. But we're now in a situation where I think shots have been fired in a way. There's already been the Channel 9 or the 9 Entertainment cyber attack 2 weeks ago. That has really caused an issue because whilst it was ransomware, James, they didn't ask for any ransom. It was complete disruption. And this is a media outlet who has suffered, I suppose, advertising money coming into them, which is, that's first world problems, as people would say. But isn't that like a first shot, really?
So it is. But this, again, is the difference between cyber warfare and, let's say, for example, someone encroaching your maritime or air.
So tell us, what would that look like?
So this is the great debate for our generation. This is the great challenge for our leadership, our elected leadership in the free world. Okay. This is the great challenge for are volunteers in the military that go through extensive and exuberant training and planning in order to defend the homeland. So we see this specifically between the Five Eyes. So Five Eyes, obviously, you guys know US, Australia, UK, Canada, and our friends from the land down under, really under, where the sheep hang out more than the people, New Zealand. Right? So all of our friends over there, the Five Eyes have kind of started building this cyber warfare playbook. Now, what happened to Channel 9 in Australia was a nation-state attack.
Yep.
Okay? Against an organization that's very critical of a specific nation-state, aka China.
Yep.
To launch a ransomware attack without a ransom, disrupt their reporting at a time where the media that's supporting the prime minister's stance in Australia against China, they're trying to almost quiet those voices and create a level of instability in order to get the people of Australia focused on something different. See, the one thing about adversaries and cyber warfare is, so if a country today flew a plane, if let's say, we'll say China, has a fighter jet and it flies and it encroaches Australian airspace, within 3 minutes it's going to be met by 3 to 5 jets of the Australian Air Force, and they're going to shoot that little plane, if it doesn't correct course, out of the sky and into absolute oblivion.
True.
And we know that's a clear encroachment. There's international law. There's 100-year precedent on this. If you invade my airspace, I'm going to warn you. I'm going to give you, there's rules of engagement before I shoot you down. I can't just pull up behind you and shoot you down. Maybe your GPS isn't working. We're going to give you the courtesy, but only for a limited amount of time.
Yeah.
Right? So there's that piece of it. That's traditional warfare. In cyber warfare, what other nation states do now, JJ, which is, I think, very fascinating, is they'll go to a cyber criminal gang. And they'll go, hey, do this for this people. Do this to these people. Don't worry about getting paid. We'll take care of it for you.
And it's sort of, it's to me like, the SWAT teams, the special forces, those very unique groups. We're used to hearing the things about espionage and spying and that type of thing. And now it really has become that cyber element. So it's more saying we need a group of or a team of people who are doing the cyber warfare element. So they're looking at getting information, they're looking at causing disruption, they're looking at infiltration and spying on people, on systems for governments, and potentially, like we saw in Florida was it last month, there was that chlorine released into the water.
So that was
at a very
in January.
dangerous level.
That was in January. That was during the Super Bowl.
That's right, yeah.
That was in a town not far from where the Super Bowl was being held. So, but that wasn't necessarily, that was a little bit of a nation state attack, although there was no real attribution to that. And part of the times is these stories die in the news cycle. And so if you don't follow up on it, I did a very interesting podcast yesterday with someone else on their show where we were talking about the role of media and cyber. And cyber warfare kind of plays right into that. Let's talk a little bit about that. Is that okay, JJ? Is it okay if we take a little pivot and talk a little bit about the media here?
We are all about the pivot, James.
Pivot. See, I'm standing. I can do the pivot. I'm
going to have to get a standing desk. I'm feeling left out. Bouncing on a football is not necessarily there you go.
I can do walking steps. It's awesome. So anyways, let's talk a little bit about the media's role in this. So the media tends to sensationalize things beyond all comprehension. And that's often the case with what's going on right now with cyber warfare. So we're talking about cyber warfare because in the news this week was the great state of Israel, the Jews. as some people would say, launched a coordinated cyber attack against the evil nation of Iran. Not the evil. Most Iranian people are very, very awesome. Greatest people I know. Their leadership is the most corrupt and evil leadership on the planet. The mullahs who run
So
Iran.
what happened here? How was this classed as an element of warfare?
So I'll explain. David Hurley says I should get decaf. No, David, I'm not getting decaf. Decaf is not
He actually,
for me, man.
For our podcast listeners who can't visually see it, just imagine, you know, those little blow-up toys you get where you punch them and they come back at you. They've got the base of water or sand and you little clowns and you punch them and they fly back at your face. That's what James is doing at the moment. But he's one of those all in himself. He's bouncing around just like that. So,
Look,
you know, just go and look after our podcast listeners.
I'm very excited because this is such an important topic, right? And it's so important to have it. So here's what happened. Yep. Iran, for the last 4 years, previous to the Biden administration in the U.S., was under strict sanctions when, at the time, President Trump pulled out of the JCPOA, aka known as the Iranian nuclear deal. Pulling out of the Iranian nuclear deal and then levying sanctions against Iran. Now, in comes in the Biden administration. They want to rejoin a really bad deal that was done. That deal was bad. The only people that don't think the deal was bad were the people who negotiated the deal. When
that's always a way.
Tells you that's a bad deal, and the only people who think it's a good deal are the people who sat in on the deal.
Yep.
It's a bad deal. Now, I'm biased, so I'll just put it out there for everyone. It's hard for me to be very non-biased in this topic, and I'll explain why. My wife's from Israel. My family's from Israel. I've lived in Israel. I love Israel. I'm an American by nature. I love America. I've served in our armed forces in America. I love my country, as you guys can't tell with all the flags that are behind me in every aspect of my shot here. But
he also does love us Aussies, by the way.
I do because
honorary
we share the same values. We share the same values.
We do.
And anyone who shares my values is my brother, irregardless to what nation they belong to. The value of liberty, of freedom, the value of freedom of thought, diversity of thought, freedom of movement. Those are all very, very important things. That's all part of what now became the Five Eyes, right? And the dream that we all share and that value system that we share. And spending time in Australia, I met so many liberty-loving folks. I was just like, I love you guys. You guys are the best. But here's the deal. Here's what happened. Do you guys remember Stuxnet? You may
give people an overview because we've got some news people inside.
So if you're in cybersecurity, you'll know Stuxnet because it's really the mother of all malware strains that exist today. But Stuxnet was developed by the U.S. and Israel. And when Iran was enriching their nuclear program during the early years of the Obama administration, they launched Stuxnet to slow down and confuse all the centrifuges and all the systems that were running all the centrifuges in their nuclear facility. One of the funny stories about Stuxnet was at night when there was no one in the facility, it would play AC/DC or Akadaka, as they would say in Australia. Akadaka. On the speakers of the computers it was on.
Makes sense.
So Stuxnet was the mother of all, and that slowed down the Iranian nuclear program significantly. It also, because they weren't hitting their goals and there was constantly sabotage going on, they executed a bunch of people. It was actually pretty, in a way it was sad, but in another way it was fairly funny because it was so smart. They didn't even have to fire a shot. They just let them attack each other and eat each other up, and it was brilliant. Then the Iranians discovered Stuxnet, and for years it kind of went unattributed. And then in 2015 or 16, I was at an event with General Petraeus and the former head of 8200, the Israeli cyber unit, and they kind of both there in a fireside chat, almost like, we don't know who did it. Do you know who did it? Do you know who did it? We don't know. Maybe it was us. Maybe it was the Germans. We don't know. Either way, now we know. So Israel on Sunday, as Iran is now renegotiating the nuclear deal with the Biden administration and Europe with European mediation, meaning they're not in Iran and the U.S. aren't in the same room. They're like in different hotels. And then imagine the European negotiators, they go from, okay, now we go Marriott to the Hilton, Hilton to the Marriott, Marriott to the Hilton, Hilton to the Marriott. Anyways, trying to negotiate it. So Iran's leverage going into this was, we're going to continue to enrich and enrich and enrich uranium. Iran's nuclear facility, the Nance nuclear facility, is built between two valleys. It's a bunker. It's a very, very secured facility. It's not everyone can get there. There's nothing around it but that place, meaning if you're hiking around that area, you're probably going to get arrested, thrown in jail, and they'll probably throw out the key and they don't know where you are anymore, right?
Yep.
So long story short, on Sunday, there was a cyber attack against that facility, and it blew up a whole wing of it. Now, Iran calls it a small explosion. If you go online and you search for the satellite shots of that facility after it, you see the amount of smoke that was billowing from that facility. That's no small explosion.
So how do they do that then? How do, remember this is the human side, the other side of cyber. From my point of view, from, the people who are tuning in now to the podcast, or they're in here live and they might be considering a question to pop up. What do we actually do when it comes to understanding what the outcome could be to us? Like, why would we be concerned about this? How can cyber, so if a bomb wasn't dropped for this to occur, how the hell does this happen? Like, our whole infrastructure really is at the beck and call of having really good cybersecurity protection.
It is. So you bring up a very interesting conundrum. So here's the conundrum. Israel was able to do this, and this was the most secured facility in all of Iran. Iran has invested, after Stuxnet, they've invested so much money. This facility was also targeted by a small explosion about 3 years ago. Okay, so this facility actually had an entire wing of it, as they were building an additional wing, wiped off, leveled by an explosion. And the folks over in Iran were like, all right, we got to secure this facility more. So they invest all this time and all these expertise and all this money, and they get Chinese experts and Russian experts, and all those experts come in. And then lo and behold, they wake up one morning a few years later, and their facility is billowing smoke, and they can't do anything in that facility, nonetheless enrich uranium because of the type of explosion there is. Now, the Israelis are being very coy. They're not really saying what happened. They're saying we did it, but they're not really saying everything they did and the extent of it. Although in off-the-record conversations I've had with some of my peers over in Israel, I've been led to believe that they did quite a lot of damage into that facility. So the next day, the Iranians, mullahs, come out and they say, we're now going to enrich uranium at 60%. And you're like, no, you're not. You're not enriching any uranium, at least for a few more years. Like, just shut up. But part of that is they're, one, trying to save face. Number two, the media reported on it. And when the media reported on it, all of a sudden they're like, oh, they just made things worse. And you're like, no, they didn't. And Israel's got a full court diplomatic press going right now, explaining to the Europeans and their American counterparts that they can't enrich at 60%. Hell, they can't enrich at 3% after what we did. They're just full of it. And it's all leverage.
There's a headline, an article written 2 days ago in the UK. This is at the sky.com, news.sky.com. So NATO prepares for world's largest cyber war game with a focus on grey zone. Military cybersecurity specialists are preparing for the largest cyber war game in the world, which kicks off tomorrow as the fictional NATO member state of Berylia comes under attack. So this is coming about amid the increasing risk of real international conflict. The exercise will also include legal teams who will need to figure out if and when a particular action is acceptable under international law. this is the thing that makes me laugh. I'm not going to continue reading it, but they're creating something in a very controlled environment. And if we get to the point of a cyber war where country A decides to cyberly attack country B, there's not going to be this rules of engagement that we've seen in previous types of wars. They're not going to wait. The lawyers aren't going to have time to say, hold on a minute, we've just got to work out what we can do here. It's not going to be like that. It's going to be we'll basically have the end result. And if they were to take out our electricity or take out our internet, cut cables in the middle of the ocean somewhere. So these can be physical things that can have a cybersecurity effect. But the way that these things are happening, it's even scary to think that organizations are sending in spies to infiltrate within companies from a cyber perspective, to actually stay in there for a while and then do stuff.
So China's been doing that for years. If you remember, we talked about the China papers, right?
Yep.
In December, January of this year. China's had deployed 2 million Chinese Communist CCP members across the world. In Australia, I think they had about 50 or 60,000 of those people that were working in some of Australia's largest companies in some very, very critical positions, doing all kinds of really wacky stuff. So
exactly,
this is no different. The only difference now, and here's where this translates. You're right. Everything you just said, you're 100% right. The next war will have cyber capabilities. And that means taking out power grids, shutting down water systems, shutting down the internet. Look what's going on in Myanmar. We don't hear about it a lot, but in Myanmar, after the military coup, right, they shut down the internet. So the people couldn't get access to the internet. So what the people do? They built a backdoor to their to the dark web and started communicating through dark web portals. So this cyber warfare has very scary implications for people.
So how do we break it down from those headlines that we see? It's cyber warfare, it's this, it's that. I'm seeing all this localized stuff at the moment, talking about 2 days ago, Australia facing potential war with China. Former Defence Minister Christopher Pyne goes on to say, former Defence Minister Christopher Pyne has warned that Australia is at risk of being dragged into a war with China amid rising tensions around Taiwan. Goes on to say, and there's little bits and pieces about it being not just a physical thing, but a cyber war as well. So not just a cyber war, but a real one involving loss of life, destruction of military platforms, and et cetera, et cetera. And that kind of thing normally should be given a little bit more time, but it's like just another headline. Is it actually a reality that the likes of China or Russia or North Korea or anybody else could actually, what do you call it? Back in the old days when people said, we're declaring war. Haven't they already declared it with what they've been doing?
So let's put some of those headlines to rest. So I've never met defense minister, your former defense minister, by the gentleman by the name of Chris Pyne. But I'm sure if we look up Chris Pyne, he's got some sort of think tank or consulting agency somewhere. And this story probably serves a way for him to go out there and secure a few speaking engagements and make some money over the next few years. Here's the deal. There are tensions with China, and China is a tyrant country led by a communist party that has zero regard to anyone but their own 100-year plan, the China 2049 plan. So let's be crystal clear about that. Australia is in the backyard of China. And Australia's current leadership might be the only honest leadership on planet Earth, outside of New Zealand. Okay?
And
you guys
have a
Prime Minister,
lot of stuff.
like him or not, he says it how it is.
Yeah.
Like it or not, he does the right thing, even though it's inconvenient. He doesn't kowtow. There's a lot to appreciate about your Prime Minister, right? I'm a fan. I know that you don't have to agree with everything someone does, but you have to agree with the concept of doing what's right, even though it's unpopular. Just because it's popular doesn't mean it's right.
Well, in this instance, on this topic, I agree with you.
Okay. So, and there's plenty of historical examples of things that were popular and weren't right, but everyone supported them. I can take you back to World War II, where prosecuting Jews was popular. Talking about the Nazi was legal, but talking about the Nazi party was illegal.
Yep. Yep.
Okay. So we can go down that route. But here's what you have to understand. If we break it down, there are tensions rising. There's tension rising because China sees a window of opportunity right now. The window of opportunity, unfortunately, is a very weak administration in the US. A president that can't string together 3 sentences without confusing something with something. And I feel really, really bad that this is what's happening to President Biden's political legacy. Because for about 25, 30 years, and even when he was VP under President Obama, he did some very good things. He's got an amazing personal story. I've had the opportunity to meet him as a senator several times. He's a really great guy. Okay. Yeah. Does he have weird quirks about him? Sure. Everyone does. Find me someone that doesn't, and then we'll have that conversation. The personal attacks and smears on him, just don't do it for me. Okay. But we clearly see someone who's in mental regression. Every medical professional who isn't blinded sees that. China sees this as an opportunity. Okay.
So what would they have to do then? What would actually have to happen for this cyber warfare to actually be seen as an act of war?
So here's what I want to go back to what you said earlier, which is, Chris Pine talks about China could attack Australia and so forth, and North Korea and Russia. So first of all, let's take a step back and let's identify, what do these people have to lose and what do they have to gain? So people talk about Russia a lot. And I'm like, Russia isn't sending their military to Southeast Asia. Russia isn't saying these parts of the Black Sea or the Ocean Pacific or the Atlantic are ours. Russia's fairly focused on their geopolitical former CIS countries and kind of rebuilding the Soviet bloc in some form or fashion. Russia's been practicing cyber capabilities and cyber kinetic capabilities. They took out the power in the Ukraine during Christmas about 5-6 years ago. They've attacked Estonia. They've attacked Moldova. They've attacked the country of Georgia. They're not innocent, but Russia isn't going to send a bunch of paratroopers to, parachute into Australia or the US.
No, but they could do this from a cyber point of view.
Yeah, but even their cyber stuff is more around money than it is around anything else.
Okay, so all right, so that's an interesting point. So we're looking at it here saying that, Russia's involved in what they're doing, but it really is more about that disruption, that getting the money, that annoying people, and being like that really naughty child in the play area. So, what about the cyber warfare element? Who do we need to worry about?
Here's the thing about Russia and cyber warfare. Russia's only using cyber warfare against strategic countries it has in order to defend Russia. So what's Russia worried about? Okay, let's take ourselves outside the West point of view for a second and put ourselves in the shoes of Russia. And Vladimir Putin, who's been ruling Russia now for 22 years, some of you have kids that are younger than how long Putin's been in charge in Russia. Okay? Putin sees the American threat on Russia, the liberation of Russia, and the spread of democracy across CIS countries. So Putin's goal is to keep this communist one-party rule in Russia. Its also goal is to show that democracy in neighboring CIS countries that have rejected communism to be very destabilizing and not good, meaning it's all a brainwash facade to keep rule in Russia. So if you understand that, then you understand everything else Russia does. Why does Russia attack the Ukraine and take out its power? Because that lets the Ukrainian people know, don't go after NATO, don't go after the EU, stick with Papa Bear Russia. Papa Bear Russia will take care of you, right? It does the same thing. So and then what they want to do domestically through cyber warfare is project that democracies aren't all what they're hyped up to be. That being free isn't really that good for you. You want to have the government tell you what you can and can't do, because look, when people are free and they can do what they want, they have, that kind of leadership, or they go through these kinds of challenges. And Russia's sitting around and laughing right now because their disinformation campaigns are working.
Yep.
So that's Russia. Cyber warfare from a US perspective, Russia's played around in the US grid, right? But Russia does that kind of stuff. They've played around in the grid. They typically do it as a way to try to gain leverage in negotiations.
Yeah, look, they do. But what if there was a situation where the whole power in the United States was taken down from a cyber
That's a
attack?
declaration of war.
So that's the declaration of war. What if one state was taken out? They focused on Washington and said, right, let's take the power out, let's get in. And is that an act of war?
That would also be I believe that would also be an act of war.
And this is the interesting thing. How do you retaliate from a cyber point of view? Do you say, right, well, we'll take out the power in your capital city? To me, it is a game that is nearly impossible to. There's no rules. It's just no rules. There's no borders. There's no laws. Nothing.
So let me ask you something. We have international laws on the use of chemical weapons.
Yep. Doesn't stop people doing whatever they want.
We have laws about free travel.
Yep.
How many times have we seen the stories that says if you're connecting through a country, you're not really entering it, that country has no jurisdiction over you. Yet if you're wanted in that country and you're connecting through it, they'll nab you right out, stick you in jail, right?
But there's no rules in the cyber world for this, and I'm just aware of time.
But even the rules that do, but my point is, even the rules that do exist, JJ, aren't really enforced. They're just on paper. They look pretty, they sound pretty, they make you feel good, but they're not really there to do anything.
Yeah, but we still do arrest people. There is still some form of, when it does come to war, there is a physical restriction that does occur at the moment, the wars that we know, the conflicts that we see. The cyber element is unseen. So often we might not even know what's occurring to be able to even say, hold on a minute, these people are gathering together over here with their tanks and their armies and their drones. You can physically see that. When it comes to online and cyber, you can't see it. So you don't know it's coming. And I'm aware of the time, but let's continue because this is an interesting element we're talking about. So we can have a longer podcast for this one by, a few minutes. That's absolutely perfect for today. So what about those situations, James?
So let's talk about China for a second, because you're kind of bringing up cyber warfare, and you brought up a question earlier, and you said, North Korea and Russia and China and Iran and all of those, you have to understand interest. And that to me is oftentimes what's being missed in all these headlines and what Chris Stein talks about. What does China stand to benefit from attacking Australia?
Power, control.
But will it maintain that power?
No, I see it as disruption, as like going into someone's sandpit and knocking down their sandcastle. I don't see the benefit of doing something like that other than saying, look how big and strong we are, look what we can do. So stop with the things that you're talking about and be nice to us.
Australia is a member of NATO.
Yeah.
The moment China attacks Australia, all of NATO is mobilized against China. And all of China's military might still may not be able to take on all 28 EU nations, the US, Canada, Australia, New Zealand. You'd imagine India would join the fight. You would imagine Israel would join the fight. You'd imagine some African nations would see this as an opportunity to join the fight. It'd be a global World War III.
So are we seeing then the little activities that they're doing, that disruptions, the like not knocking down the sandcastle, but knocking down the little castle just before the sandcastle, just to say we're here, and it's annoying. It's like just that fly you can't quite get rid of because they're not doing enough to cause NATO to step in. It is more about saying they're still doing it. They brought down one of our free-to-air stations, one of our most well-known things here with, Nine Entertainment. First big attack on media. They've taken and attacked through ANU, one of our universities here. And there's quite a few places, large, what I would call infrastructure type things that have been the victim of cyber attacks. And there doesn't seem to be any change in what's happening. So to me, it's like it's not actually getting the result they want. I don't get it. I don't understand why they'd even be bothering. To your point, what is China or anybody going to benefit by a cyber war or a cyber attack against Australia? Makes no sense.
So they stand to create destabilization and get you to focus on something else. One thing
red
that
button thing.
one thing that China's very good at is throwing misdirections.
Yeah, and look, this is important, folks. This is why we do this. I didn't think for a moment that I'd get to a point in this topic and think, this really is just like, look over here, while they're doing other things here. It's the manipulation, that trickery, and it's another element of deception. The headlines are there to grab our attention, yes, but what they're doing, we've got to also think that China is exporting so much of our resource here from Australia. They can't afford to do anything negative like that. Yeah, it's fascinating. I just find that I came into this with one thought in my brain and it's gone a complete other direction. That is really interesting. I love our conversations, James.
So, yeah, for those that are listening on the audio version of this podcast, we're going to sign off here. We're going to continue this discussion, so you can go to our YouTube channel on the other side of cyber or at the Cyber Hub podcast. You can catch the rest of this episode there. Okay, so let's continue this conversation. I'll be able to pull that stuff out there in a minute. So here's something very interesting, though. So when we talk about what China is doing at the moment, right?
Yep.
We look at cyber warfare. China, what they did so the encroachment that's happened globally over the last decade. So whether that be Russia and Crimea and part of eastern Ukraine, whether it be what China did in Hong Kong, whether it be what's going on in Syria, all that stuff shows a little bit of a less of an appetite of the world to want to fight. And for tyrants, for dictators, that's an opportunity. See, so the more we say we're peace-seeking, loving people who don't want war, the more people like leaders like Putin or Xi Jinping, whatever his name is, the guy in China. I'll never say his name right just to tick him off. Okay. All these people, okay. All of them simultaneously, all of them see that as a sign of weakness, see that as an opportunity to go in and do stuff. So imagine if the war said, hey, China, you do one thing in Hong Kong and we're going to blow you to smithereens. We're going to cut off all trade with you. Would China have done what they did to Hong Kong?
No. Or would they, because they don't think like me? That's the thing, asking those type of questions to a peaceful individual is a tough one, because there's no possible way I can answer it. It's like saying, if we were talking about serial killers, I don't get it. I just don't get it. It's just not in my DNA why someone would want to do that. So logically, no, they wouldn't. But when we're looking at the reasons why they're doing all this stuff, of course they would. They don't care about that. They'd say, fine, well, let's see how you go. We're going to do it anyway. And that's the challenge, because the bulk of the world, in my opinion, are good people. They're law-abiding citizens who want the right thing. There's that certain percent that has all the power and all the money, and they're the ones that seem to be doing all this fighting. And they're the ones that seem to have all the people on the cyber area. And that's the scary part.
So you bring up something that I think is very, I don't want to say just interesting, but I want to say it's very... It's a dilemma, and it's a dilemma that I don't know that anyone can solve, because international agreements don't solve this. Whenever someone says we should do a UN international multi-nation treaty, and I'm like, they've tried to do it in cyber multiple times, and every small country in the world has signed onto it, and then the U.S., Russia, China, Iran, North Korea, Israel won't sign on to it.
Yep.
Right? Because those nations understand that the moment you sign on to something like that, you lose a capability. Because just remember, just because China does it to us doesn't mean we don't do it to them.
Oh, absolutely. There's no one here who is innocent. I'm sure that the Australians would be doing it as well. It is not something that there's no, what do you call it, no innocence here. There's different levels of the cyber warfare, whatever you want to call it, going on around the world. I think the most important thing I've learned from our conversation so far, James, is, from that other side of cyber, from that human, from that our listeners, our watchers to the show, thank you for doing that. We appreciate it. Make sure you share it with everyone that you know. Our target is the APAC region and, of course, our friends all around the world. What I've picked up is this is about understanding what the headlines really mean and asking yourself those questions. Would insert country here actually do something like this to us? Because the ramifications of that would outweigh the short-term disruption that it would cause. So they're more likely to do those little things that we're seeing now, a couple of weeks disruption in Nine Entertainment, maybe a week's disruption for our universities, that type of thing. I don't think it's going to be a national situation because, to James' point, that is an act of war. And then, we're all screwed. So it's very interesting for our listeners, for our watchers, to take a breath and say, okay, we're seeing all these headlines. We must make sure we do our research, read it all, and often you'll see it's just words. There is no actions, and it's the same thing, the same cycle over and over again. And, we're the guys you want to come to say, what does it mean to us? What does this mean to me? The individual, the family, the organisation, what does it actually mean? This is not about being concerned that China's going to cut off our power. And that's important. And yes, thank you, James. All opinions on the show are our own and don't reflect any organisation, because this is a conversation. This is, what do you think? This is what I think. This is what I've read. And that's how we've come up with all these amazing things. And let me tell you, I did not come into this particular conversation thinking I would end up talking like I am now. Very interesting, James. Thank you.
I think there's what to me is really important for us to comprehend, understand, take into consideration significantly is this concept of what we do today, what we do, the decisions we make, just because we view the world one way, doesn't mean everyone else views it the same way we do. I know that's a hard reality to swallow, and it's a tough pill to swallow. But let me just say the following: in the battle between democracy and freedom and communism and tyranny, there's kind of almost a what I like to call the thing about freedom isn't free.
No.
And just because free isn't freedom doesn't mean you get it that way. You got to fight for it. And we are now at a crossroads, no different than when air travel when people could get on planes and go to places, countries started getting worried too, because now all of a sudden this other nation is flying an airplane. Before you had radars, right? Before you had all the technology, they would fly airplanes over your country and take pictures and then take it back, right? And people then had the same conversations you and I were having.
Yeah, it's relative, isn't it? It's based on the unknown and the fear, that unknown, and that, I think, that is the outcome of everything. We're going to continue to see more headlines. I do believe that there will be an act of cyber war somewhere in the world, and it won't be just on one particular organisation or one particular country. There's going to be, and it's going to get worse and worse. Look, I hope it doesn't. I hope I'm absolutely wrong. However, I'm seeing that the cyber element seems to be more disruptive and causing people to lose billions of dollars sometimes, and they're not going to recover from it. So, and like you've said, and it's a very interesting point for us all to really understand, is that gets us focusing on one thing where we don't see what else is going on. We know what the right hand's doing, we have no idea what the left hand's doing. So it's about being aware. It's not looking at everything as disinformation or misinformation. It's certainly not fake news, But we need to respect that these are headlines, and what are headlines designed to do? Get our attention and get us talking, get us arguing, get us to decide we don't like China. It's not China. It's the government. It's certain areas, and that's another important thing. It's not the whole place. The people there are good people. And every country is the same. You can't say that everybody in any particular area is nasty, because that doesn't happen. But also we're having the problem, James, of the hacker groups or the cyber criminal groups that do find themselves in countries like that, who will attack another country, and maybe the government has no idea about them, but the government potentially could claim responsibility for things that do happen, because it makes them look a little bit fearsome in the eyes of the world at that time. My concern is things like we've got the Olympics coming up, and any big event that comes up could be a target for further cyber attacks that do seem to be that act of war. I don't know. What do you think?
So I agree with that. I think the appetite for war isn't there right now. But I'd say build it up and get ready for it, because it's coming.
So whose record was it, Appetite for Destruction? Was that Guns N' Roses?
I think so. Pretty sure.
Appetite for Destruction. So it's not Appetite for War, or it's Appetite for
There isn't an
Disruption.
appetite for war. There's a world that is global, and there's countries that are trying to gain interests in different parts of the globe. And there's going to come a time where we have to stand up and speak. So people over the last year or so on the show have been like, James, you're very, very focused on targeting China. Why aren't you worried about Russia and North Korea and Iran? And I'm like, I'm worried about Iran. But Iran doesn't have the capabilities to cause mass destruction. They have a little bit of capabilities. Now, they use a bunch of terrorist organizations as proxies. So there's stuff to be concerned with them there. But it's stuff that can be handled. We're used to seeing it. We've seen it done before. We can deal with it. But we're talking about China rising as a superpower with an agenda of communism, with an agenda of constant surveillance, of eliminating your ability to have any sort of liberty in speech. And that's more concerning to me. It's more concerning to me because, for those who don't know, I'm a history buff. And I enjoy history. And I'm comparing the rise of China today very similarly to the rise of the Nazi Party in the late 20s and early 30s in Europe, because the origin of the Nazi Party started in Austria and then went into Germany, and then from there into Poland, into Czechoslovakia, today the Czech Republic, and Yugoslavia, a bunch of other places, okay? And a lot of the world stood there, and they didn't have an appetite because they had just come out of World War I. People were like, people had the memories of injured coming home, of their fathers leaving and never coming back, of their brothers going and never coming. There's that was there in the memory. So people said, no big deal. That's no biggie. They're just talking. It's politics. Yep. Okay. We're doing the same exact thing all over again. The definition of stupidity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result.
Absolutely. And it happens,
We may not have an appetite for fighting, but we're in a fight. And you can't turn the other cheek every time, because eventually the person you're fighting is going to be a giant and you stand no chance. And the loss of life then is going to be greater. It's going to be either conform and live. I use the movie 300 in a lot of my cybersecurity talks. But this analogy to me is no different than 300. Remember, in 300, what did they come and offer him? They said, we'll let you keep Sparta. Hey, Australia, we'll let you stay Australia. But you can't criticize China. You can't do all these things. And you have to let us do and trade with you any way we want to. So are you free or are you not free at that point?
Not free.
So you've got to fight. And there's no choice. And I know that's scary. And I know that's I've had my China visa revoked, and I don't care. I don't care. I don't care. I don't care.
Isn't this probably one of the most free talking, relaxed podcast, YouTube live shows, cyber shows out there at the moment, James? And I really appreciate it that we can do that.
We need to have these conversations, and people need to understand, yeah, we're going to get into a fight. And you know what? This fight's going to be ugly. And you know what? People are going to die. But you know what?
I think, yeah.
You know what we stand if we don't fight? We have tyrants take over our lives, take away our freedoms, our rights, our properties, our joys, because it doesn't conform. So if you're religious in any spiritual, in any sort of way, if you follow Buddhism or Christianity or Judaism or Ramadan Kareem, to all of our friends that are, celebrating Ramadan this month and in their fast. So, may you have an easy fast. So a few things. If you look at that and you go, I enjoy these freedoms don't exist in China. Now they exist in Russia, and that's the difference. They want you to look at Russia and go, but Russia has religious freedom. There's Muslims in Russia and Chechnya. They don't prevent Chechnyans from going to the mosque. There's freedom of religion in Russia, which is very different. Now, the predominant religion in Russia is the Russian Orthodoxy version of Christianity. But nonetheless, they still have religion on their menu. But if you look at North Korea and you look at China, it's completely different. If you look at Iran doesn't have freedom of religion. You're either a Muslim or you're not. Right now, they say they do, and they've got a small Christian population that's often persecuted and not very spoken about because persecuting of Christians is not very cool, right? Like the media doesn't want 72 Christians were killed in Iran yesterday for refusing to convert to Islam or for defending a woman who was being gang raped by a bunch of Muslims on the streets.
Yeah.
Not a sexy headline. Christians not anymore. All right. So
I appreciate your history on this and your knowledge on this, James. It's a very it's really good. Keep going.
So we have to come to a point where we go, we got to really fight these. We really have to fight these, and we have to fight it in a way where we have to go and just go, I don't have to agree with everything you say, right? Yep. But I will fight for you to be able to say those things, as long as you don't try to silence me.
Exactly.
But what's happening right now is we're in the midst of a bunch of small fires around us, and they're trying to make a very small brush fire seem like it's a huge fire. And in other cases, we're seeing huge fires being made little. So
you're right. John has a really good point there. I'm sure you can see it from YouTube. These are good conversations. We need to be free to have differing views and be able to express them. We also need to learn that somebody with a differing view than our own should be celebrated. Absolutely. And that's something, John, we part of the reason James and I started this conversation, this podcast, The Other Side of Cyber, is because whilst we're very similar in our values and in the way we live our lives and just our natures, we're very different. We come from different worlds, and the conversations we have, yes, they're about cybersecurity. Yes, they're about staying safe online, but they also include the world and our world views and how they all fit in. And we find over and over again, and this is what I love about it, James, it's like a surprise every time we have a conversation. We know the core of what we're going to talk about. We know the highlights for each of us individually. Okay, this is what I want to talk about. This is what you'll talk about. We don't know those things. And then we end up with an amazing understanding of, let's look at it for what it actually is. And let's not decide who is and who isn't going to start a cyber war, but let's just look at it. Let's just talk about it. And you can make your own decisions from there. That's what I really appreciate, and I'm grateful for that we can have these conversations. So thanks for that, John. Much appreciated.
John's awesome. So I will say this to wrap, because we're almost out of time. So we do need to wrap. So
take us out.
I have another live show in 34 minutes. It's our
Well,
cyber.
I have a meeting with my American team in 34 minutes. So, you know, we both got stuff to do. I love it.
So let's look at it like this. From our perspective, I want to say this. There are threats out there. Cyber warfare is a real threat, right? It could impact your life. It could cause massive disruption, could cause loss of life. Cyber warfare can cause loss of life even without firing a bullet. If I take down the electrical grid and your pacemaker or the medical device that keeps you alive is relying on that electricity and you have no backup, you're going to die and you're going to be a victim of that cyber attack. We saw that happen during COVID in Germany and Cologne, where a patient was on their way to a hospital that was under a ransomware attack and had to go to a different hospital that was further away, and the patient died en route to the other hospital because they couldn't get the care they needed. So
you can't put that on the death certificate.
Here's my challenge to people who listen to this episode after the fact. If you disagree, great. Prove me wrong. Come with facts. Come with historical facts about this. I'm not saying that America and Australia and the West is always on the right. We've plenty of times that we've erred. I don't live in a dream world where everything we've ever done in our entire human history has just been perfection. But I dare to someone to find me a more liberated society than the one that we've fostered, that's prosperous and free than the one that exists today.
Exactly.
Humans, the technological advancements, think of it like this, and I'll end with this, JJ, and you can sign us off. A year ago, we were introduced to a global pandemic, the kind that the world hasn't seen since 1918 in the Spanish flu. And it took almost 6 years to get the Spanish flu under control. We're a year from COVID. People are getting vaccinated. We're saving lives every single day. And that's because of a free and open society where the humans are allowed to go about it. Because the vaccines didn't come from China or Russia. They came from free, open society. Keep that in mind.
Wow, what a way to finish up. James, thank you. I've really enjoyed this. It's been a very eye-opening conversation. And you are listening to The Other Side of Cyber and watching The Other Side of Cyber. We appreciate you staying on board with us. Please make sure you subscribe or smash that subscribe button. And my son would tell me that's the most cringiest thing to say. Make sure I can hear him saying, yeah. Make sure you follow and like us. We love what we do, and we really want to share this across many people that we can in the Australian market, in the APAC market, and the rest of the world, of course. So I'm Jacqueline Jane, JJ, saying thank you very much, and over to you, James, to finish that up.
Guys, thanks so much for watching the show. Make sure to subscribe. We are live at 9 p.m. every Thursday in Australia. 9 p.m. Sydney time, correct?
Correct.
9 p.m. Sydney time for our folks over in Australia. It's 7:30 a.m. Eastern time on Thursday morning for all of the folks over here on this side of the world. And for those in Europe, it's the middle of your day. So make sure to tune in, subscribe, and be part of the conversation. And we're going to try to bring this conversation also into Clubhouse and so much more. So make sure to go to the Other Side of Cyber Club on Clubhouse. Yep. If you're not on Clubhouse, you want an invite, reach out to me or JJ. We'll get you one. Because as community members, we get a bunch of them. So let's do that.
Yep. And we'll be on every Monday night on Clubhouse.
Yes, we are every Monday night on Clubhouse. That is 8:30, I believe.
I think so. Could be 10 p.m. I forget. We're changing the times all the time.
10 p.m.
10 p.m. Melbourne time.
Melbourne time. Melbourne. I love Melbourne. I love Melbourne.
Thank you, everybody.
All right, guys. Cheers. Have a great rest of your day.